Since you mentioned that you're running for Senate, I think often when we think about U.S. foreign policy, we think of it as a like an executive, thing, right? Like the president really leads on foreign policy. What do you think is the role of the Senate when it comes to foreign policy, and especially when it comes to like the U.S. relationship with China?
The United States Senate has an extremely important constitutional role in foreign policy, specifically related to treaties, but also in holding the executive branch to account for what they are doing. And as the upper chamber, it is the responsibility of every single United States senator to be an expert in national security, foreign policy, and international affairs issues. And sadly, we do not see that in a lot of cases in the United States Senate. And as a result, a lot of the United States Senate over the course of recent history has abdicated some of their constitutional responsibility to the executive branch instead of making sure that the executive branch is checked in the right way through the advice and the consent of the United States Senate. And that is the responsibility of the US Senate to wrestle back some of that responsibility, but also the American public to make sure that we are electing people that have the strategic vision and understanding of foreign affairs so that they can fulfill those constitutional responsibilities from their position in the United States Senate.
So your new book has come out, and one of the things you talk about is leadership that challenges convention. What does that mean, and what does that mean specifically with respect to how we can deal with China?
Thanks for asking. Specifically, the book is entitled Boom. And that is the idea that we need to break apart some of the convention and we need to ignite innovation. We need to break down barriers. And in my mind, every single area of our society needs leaders that are willing to do some igniting of innovation and breaking down barriers and challenging conventions. Specifically with regard to China, I think that it's very easy within the American national security establishment to do the next thing that is very close to the thing that we had done before. And instead of taking a fresh look at what are we actually doing, then we're just adding on to the status quo. I mentioned earlier F-16s in a place like Taiwan. I'm not saying that Taiwan doesn't need American air power assistance as a part of their strategic capabilities, but are we actually providing them either through American foreign military financing or through foreign military sales, the right mix of capabilities that they need that actually isn't just a portfolio that is based on the inertia of the past, but is based on a fresh look at the real strategic challenges in that area. And to me, leaders are very comfortable just being an extension of the status quo. To me, that's not leadership. That's management at best. Leaders actually take a look at real problems and find real solutions that are partly informed by the status quo, but are also absolutely tied to the real objectives and the real requirements instead of just an extension that is a boring passing on of the buck from the predecessor to the successor.
Yeah, but there's going to be a lot of pushback to anyone who tries to exert a leadership role by challenging convention.
No, you're right. And I think that a leader shouldn't take a leadership position if they're not willing to take pushback. Here's what I found, certainly as a leader commanding Edwards Air Force Base or Joint Base Andrews, or being the senior defense official to Iraq, that you've got an incredible team underneath you. And if you can start soliciting by listening to them and considering their ideas, then ultimately you can act upon some of those ideas and you can be better informed to explain yourself up the chain so that your bosses or the American public better understand that it is in their best interest to do something different instead of just be an extension of the status quo. And every single time that I have seen my team unleashed in solving a problem, they also have helped me create a communications plan that has made it something that is not just palatable, but something that is eagerly embraced by my chain of command above me. And I acknowledge that there is always pushback from a frozen middle or from below or from above. But when you start creating an environment within your team, including in the national security realm, where you are soliciting ideas that you would have never thought about, then now you're able to take action in a way that isn't just wedded to the status quo, but is actually wedded to the power of the minds within your organization that have created something new and have found a way to communicate it in a way that is palatable and eagerly accepted by those around you.
That sounds like a very different reality to the U.S. military than is usually portrayed in Hollywood films, where it's the leader, the general, is like a petty tyrant who doesn't listen to anyone.
You're right. I think that sometimes by watching Hollywood or actually seeing really bad examples of leadership, we think that an organization is a leader that makes all the decisions and all of the people in the organization that just carry out orders blindly without thought. Sometimes that exists, and you see ineffective organizations or an ineffective national security establishment as a result. But when you find ways to break down barriers by eliciting feedback and listening to people all around you, then now it's just a leader with a bunch of dumb, mindless followers, but it is an organization that solicits ideas that can be culled through by the leadership team to ultimately be able to make the best decisions, not just for your organization, but in a national security establishment context for the betterment of the nation and support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
One of the things that we want to talk about in this podcast is the upcoming election. I mean, obviously we've talked about that you're running for Senate, but election interference from foreign adversaries is a real issue. And it was certainly an issue in 2020 that we all remember, accusations of foreign interference. It also came up in 2016, but from the opposite side of the aisle, saying that there was election interference and that's why Trump won, right? So is this a real threat? And how do you see this, if so, potentially playing out in the 2024 elections?
It goes back to that 1999 strategy of unrestricted warfare. Part of unrestricted warfare is changing the mindset of a population, the United States or Western Europe or whoever it may be. And going back to that TikTok example that we described earlier with respect to support for Hamas, that TikTok or other informational avenues are already swaying the minds of the American public, specifically those that have TikTok and the younger population that lives on TikTok. But it's also the case that there are other nefarious ways that an adversary, Russia or China primarily, can adjust the mindset sufficiently of a country or a population such that now they are able to sway the results of an election. We talked about Taiwan and the election that is taking place as we film this tomorrow within Taiwan. That certainly China, the Chinese Communist Party specifically, has been finding ways to dissuade the Taiwanese people from voting for a hardliner that would take a stand that maybe would shift Taiwan's focus towards more of an independent focus. And we see within the United States that China is already influencing our minds via Chinese communist clubs and colleges or via TikTok. And certainly there is a more advanced strategy within China or from China and from or within Russia as well that is doing their best to achieve their strategic aims by adjusting the mindset of the American populace so that China can achieve their objectives with minimal interference from the United States.